Welcome to our series on St. Matthew's Gospel. We are considering the message that is in chapter 25. And in our last episode, I shared a few things about the 10 bridesmaids. So let me just pull that together so that we can go forward. In this chapter, Matthew is sort of pulling all the strings together, making sure that you have heard everything and that you are ready for the enormity of the events of the Passion of Jesus. So first of all, the number 10 represents fullness. That's why God only gave us 10 words. We call them 10 commandments, because it represented everything we needed for our life on earth. So the 10 bridesmaids, therefore, represent the fullness of all the people who will have been and ever will be as members of His church. It represents the entire church. And the Lord has told us in the chapters preceding this one that we have to be awake and vigilant. I mean, He actually told us in chapter 24, verse 42, so stay awake, because you do not know the day that your master is coming. You may be quite sure that if you knew when a thief would break into your house, that you would be ready. And so the story of the 10 bridesmaids waiting for the bridegroom to come is a picture of the church between the first parousia, or return of Jesus, and the final parousia of Jesus, which is the final glorious coming. So it's chapter 25 is dealing with that period of time. We're not dealing with the time of Moses. We're not dealing with the people of Israel. We're now dealing with the members of the kingdom of God following the covenant of Jesus. And one of the things that's made perfectly clear is they all got tired. They all slept. Nobody was staying awake and nobody was vigilant. I mean, this is complete disobedience to Jesus. And when we go into Gethsemane, we'll find that the three famous apostles, Peter, James, and John, they'll sleep through it as well. They won't remain alert and vigilant. And of all the people in the church you would expect to be ready for the events that were coming, it was those three men, and yet they just didn't grasp it. We get so caught up in the events of everyday life, which Jesus said would happen, because things would be like the time of Noah, and we would become drowsy and asleep. So if in our lives we have not majored on the three great virtues of faith, hope, and love, then if you fall asleep, you are really in dire trouble. Also back in chapter 7, from verse 21, the Sermon on the Mount, and you've noticed that as we have gone along in the Gospel, how often I've had to reference you back to the Sermon on the Mount, because this is Jesus's foundational teaching. Everything is said there. And in this Sermon on the Mount in chapter 7 from verse 21, Jesus said that when the time comes, and you're talking about the parousia, He said, people will say to me, Lord, Lord. He said, that is not your entry into the kingdom of heaven, because the bridesmaids say, Lord, Lord, open to us. You know us. I mean, we're the friends of the bride. You know us. And this is chapter 25, verse 12. And Jesus said He would reply to them, I tell you solemnly, I don't know you. Now, how does He know us or not know us? So let's come back to chapter 7 again. And He said, the only one who will enter the kingdom of heaven is the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. He said, and many will come to me that day saying, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not work mighty miracles in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Aren't they all great works? And I will tell them to their faces, I never knew you. So the absolute bottom line is that we're doing the will of the Father. And in chapter 8, Jesus said, "Those who do the will of my Father are my brother, sister, and mother." Now, watch where that's going. So the disciples who are awake are doing the will of God. They're keeping their spiritual life alive. They're keeping their connection with God alive through prayer and through all the sacraments. And they are ready, therefore, if the Lord calls them. So at the end of this parable of the bridesmaids, in verse 13, we read, "So stay awake, because you do not know the day or the hour." And it stops there. But the end of that sentence is, "of your master's return." So Matthew is giving a solemn warning to the church in every generation, in every country, in all conditions, that we have to be very vigilant and stay awake. Now, it's in this context of needing to be vigilant and staying awake and keeping your spiritual life alive that the parable of the talents is given. And so in the parable of the talents, Jesus said, it's like a man on his way abroad, and he summoned his servants and entrusted his property to them. Now, I love the way that's actually presented, because Jesus is the man on his way to go abroad. He's going to go through the passion, death, and resurrection to the other side, to his Father's kingdom. He's on his way abroad, and he is going to leave all the treasure of the kingdom of God in the hands of his servants. But his servants have different capacities, so they will receive different gifts from the Spirit. They're not all equal, because none of us are equal. We have different levels of intelligence and understanding, and we've different abilities in all kinds of things. So the gift and the challenge is given according to your ability. So there's the Lord reading his disciples very, very well. And so we're told that he actually gave 5 talents to one. Now, you need to know that the talent was the highest piece of currency known in the Roman Empire. And so if you know that, then you know that what was given to this person, 5 talents, is a huge treasure. Huge treasure. There's an awful lot he could do with it. And to another was given 3, and then to another one there was 1. Now, sometimes when we're reading this parable, we think that the man who only got 1 was somehow shortchanged. Absolutely not, because this 1 talent was the highest piece of currency in the Roman Empire. It was a real treasure that was given to him. And the treasure that's given to each of the 3 of them, there are 3 different types of servants of God. Now, we usually get 2, but in this case we're getting 3. And the reason why we're getting 3 in this particular case is that this story follows the rule of 3. And in a story that follows the rule of 3, all the emphasis is on the 3rd one. In my culture, we have a lot of stories about the Englishman, the Scotsman, and the Irishman, and the story is told against the Irishman, because all the emphasis is on the 3rd one. Sometimes we try to reverse the story, but it doesn't work that way. Usually the stories have the Irishman as the last one, and therefore all the emphasis is on him. And this is the reason why there's 3 here, while we usually only get an example of 2. Then the master goes away, and he totally trusts his servants to take care of his property. Now, what you're looking at here is a preview of the church when Jesus leaves us in the ascension. And he leaves all the treasure that he has won in his passion, death, and resurrection, and as well as his entire life, he leaves it all to the leaders of the church particularly. And they're gifted in different ways. I mean, the job that was given to Peter wasn't given to John. And the job given to John wasn't given to Thaddeus. They were given different roles in the kingdom of God, but all of them, in their own way, was called to actually take care of the kingdom of God wherever they were. So eventually the master comes back, and in verse 18 we're told, 3rd one, the one who had received 1 talent, He went away and he dug a hole in the ground and he hid his master's money. Now this is the slothful servant who will not do anything. No matter what you give him, the talent was a huge treasure. No matter what you give him, he's going to make an excuse not to use it. It's the problem of sloth and laziness. It's also the problem of no love for your Lord. And then you're told a long time later, the master returned. So this, you're talking about now the final glorious coming of Jesus and what is going to happen at the end of time. You're no longer talking about the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. This is the church on the long haul. And so he calls each one of them and they have to give an account of their stewardship. Now that was perfectly normal, and this is not the only parable in which this kind of story was given to us. We've already had the parable of the wicked husbandmen, which is similar in its background. And so when they came to give an account of their stewardship, the first one was able to say, I've actually done quite well. I've been able to double the amount of treasure. And the second one had exactly the same story. Now there's 3 only. So 2/3 producing good results is an awful lot better than Matthew usually gives us. Matthew usually puts the number much, much lower than that. Because when we were dealing with the parable of the sower, it was only 25% that actually produced the goods. When you look at Matthew saying 2 men in the fields, 1 taken and 1 left, that's 50%. So 2/3 is pretty good. But these 2 are just pushed aside in order to learn the lesson of the third one, which is the reason why the parable is given. But first of all, let's hear what Jesus said to the 2 faithful ones. His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have shown that you can be faithful in small things." That's very interesting. What are these small things? And I will entrust you with greater. Come and enjoy your master's happiness. So what the Lord is saying is that to him who has, more will be given. If you've proven by your actions and by your response to God that you can be entrusted with some job that the Lord gives to you, that you will do it faithfully and you'll carry it out faithfully, then the Lord will give you a greater and greater and greater ability to do that. Any of us who have tried to persevere in the challenge the Lord has given to us has actually found that, because spiritually things are very different to material things. If you take the parameters between my 2 hands for a moment, supposing that was the level of faith and love that was given to me in baptism, then that's the treasure I've been given. Now, if I use them, both faith and love will grow. So once it grows, I have a much greater treasure with which to face life and to do the things that the Lord wants me to do. Therefore, I can produce a greater result. And that will make faith and love grow even more. And so it keeps growing until I have much, much more than I need for myself. But like the man with the 1 talent, if you don't use it, it will diminish. You still don't use it, it will diminish, and you can actually reach the point of losing it altogether. And it's losing the talent is the issue in this particular parable. And so the positive result that is produced by the first 2 is really interesting. And when they're told that they will share in the master's happiness, we have to go to other parts of Matthew and other parts of the scriptures to know what is sharing in the master's happiness. For example, in Revelation 3:21, Jesus said, "I will let you share my throne, my reign." In Matthew 8:11, Jesus had prophesied that many will come from the east and the west, and they will sit down at the banquet of the Lord with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the reward there is the Messianic banquet. In chapter 22, verses 1 to 14, and on to 25, the reward was to be invited to the wedding, which is the Messianic banquet. Matthew 25:10, the wise virgins were actually brought into the banquet, into the Messianic banquet. So the reward you get is actually that entry deeper and deeper into the reality of what Jesus has offered for us. Now, the Messianic banquet on earth is the Eucharist. The Messianic banquet in heaven is the final reward. And what we do on earth in the Eucharist is the foretaste of what we will receive in heaven. So when you come to the third one, then you find that this one wants to make an excuse for his laziness and his sloth. And what he starts doing is accusing the master. Now, it's very interesting that to defend yourself, you deflect your problem onto other people. Now, that's actually very common among human beings, that if people don't want to face a problem that they have, they'll paste it onto somebody else. For example, how frequently you might have heard someone saying, "You make me angry." Nobody can make you angry. You make yourself angry because of your response. Well, we want to paste it onto somebody else and say it's your responsibility that I'm feeling like this, okay? We like to project onto others the problem that we don't face ourselves. So the third one in verse 24 said, "Sir, I heard that you were a hard man, that you reap where you do not sow and you gather where you do not scatter. Therefore I buried your talent. Here it is. Have it back." Now, if you've given a great treasure to somebody, it's a total personal insult to have it thrown back in your face. And so here you have the unworthy servant, the one who will not do anything with the grace or the gifts that has been given to him. And he turns around and tries to say it's God's problem, it's God's fault. It isn't. Okay, because we were made like God in our creation. And he has given us intelligence, free will, grace, and everything we need. There is no excuse. And so the Lord is so humble that he said, okay, you discovered I was a hard man. There's no evidence in the gospel at all that Jesus was a hard man. None whatsoever. There's also no evidence in the gospel that Jesus would reap where he didn't sow. But it's the humility of the master in front of his servant. And he said, your real problem is that you are a lazy, slothful servant. My translation says, you wicked, lazy servant. Now, wicked has been a favorite word that Matthew has been using for a number of chapters, and it means anomia, lawlessness. And basically it is that I am doing what I want, when I want it, where I want it, why I want it. And I will not do your will, particularly if it's God's will. So here you've got a person absolutely against the will of God. Now, Jesus had said in chapter 8, those who do the will of my Father are my mother, sister, and brother. You're going to discover that only the family gets into the house. If you're not the mother or sister or brother, you won't get in. Mishpocha is too precious for that. Mishpocha is the Hebrew word for family. Okay. And so in verse 26, his master replied, verse 28, take the talent from this man and give it to the other one. But everybody else would say, but the other one has already got 10. But the Lord's answer to that would be, and this one will be as safe as those 10. Because he will multiply them. This one is using his gifts, he's using his graces, he's using his life, he's using all the opportunities that's given to him. So this one is not misusing the responsibility that's been given to him. And then we have the teaching, which we've already had in chapter 13, for to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. And from the man who has not, even that which he has will be taken away. But as for this good-for-nothing servant, we're supposed to produce fruits, the fruits of the Spirit. Go to John 15, you get exactly the same teaching, just using a different image. I am the vine, you are my branches. Don't produce fruit, you'll be lopped off. Produce fruit, you'll be cut back to bear more fruit. It's just a different image, that's all. It's exactly the same teaching. And this good-for-nothing servant, throw him out into the dark, where there will be weeping and grinding of teeth. Now, back in chapter 13, we heard this at the end of so many parables. But those parables were addressed to the Jewish people. And in case Christians sort of felt, well, that's for them, you know, they failed the Lord and they killed him and they did this and they did that and all. And you can feel quite comfortable unless you know enough about the Gospels. Jesus says, the rule is exactly the same for you. God is completely even-handed. When he's dealing with the people of the Old Covenant, he deals with them according to justice, mercy and love. When he's dealing with the people of the New Covenant, he deals with us according to justice, mercy and love. Same God. He's the Father of us all. We're all his children, every one of us. And so here's Matthew giving you the very bad news in the parable of the bridesmaids and the parable of the talents, that Christians can lose their souls eternally. They might have come to the conclusion, but it would be foolish, that all the judgment was for the Jewish people. And the answer is no. God is completely even-handed with everybody. And this is something that we all really need to take on board. So since all of this teaching is given to the apostles more than anybody else, Peter and Andrew and James and John and all the others are being told that a shepherd who does not lead his sheep will be very severely dealt with. If you've been given the responsibility to take care of the flock, you must take care of them. Why would I come to that conclusion? We have just come out of chapter 23, where Jesus gave this terrible indictment of the leadership of Israel, who had failed to lead their flocks, and they were looking after themselves. Now, this is a very timely warning for us in the time that we're actually in right now, because some of the leaders may in fact be looking after themselves. If you read Ezekiel 34, which is behind the condemnation of the leadership of Israel in chapter 23 here in Matthew, you'll find that, and I read it for you, the leaders were looking after themselves. They were not looking after the flock. Well, if the leaders today are looking after their own advancement and their own position and their own power and their everything to do with themselves and their own education and their own everything, they're not taking care of the flock. And that's why Pope Francis gave such a timely reminder to all of them that a leader, a shepherd, must have the smell of the sheep on them. In other words, they should be out there among their people doing everything that Jesus did in his day, because Jesus is our model, not anybody else. So we have these two parables giving us a preparation for the final section of Matthew 25. And in the final section of Matthew 25, you are often told it is the parable of the final judgment. It's not a parable, it's a vision of what will happen. I'll share that with you in our next episode. Thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht dé libh. Goodbye. God bless you.